another episode of the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast with myself, as always, Alex Connor. Thank you for joining me today. And just a quick side note before we start, the podcast is now available across all audio listenable platforms. So you will find us now on Google Play, Spotify, iTunes, etc. And I just want to say a quick thank you, as always, to the positive feedback that we've been getting. We're definitely growing a small, little, diverse audience. And it's great to hear that people are enjoying the conversations and taking something positive out of it. Now, my guest today is Dan Jolley. And a little bit about him is he's currently completing a PhD in educational psychology at Curtin University, where he looks at the knowledge and critical thinking ability of exercise professionals. Now, I participated in a questionnaire that Dan sent out. Now, don't quote me, it was over a year ago, it was a while ago now, and he recently emailed back with his findings, which alluded me to have a look at what he was currently doing, and I liked what I saw, and I reached out and said, hey, look, would you like to do a podcast and share some knowledge? Because we do share a passion for increasing the industry standard and, educating personal trainers and perhaps dispelling some myths and instilling within them better protocols, better systems, and better processes to be more successful in the industry, but also to be a better practitioner. So we get into some really interesting notions and some recommendations as well for people who are looking to get in the industry and also people in the industry teaching as well. Dan teaches Certificate 3 and 4 in fitness at TAFE in college in Western Australia. He also possesses a Master of Science in Exercise Physiology and a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science. He's worked in the fitness industry for over 20 years, so he's got a multitude of experience, which we definitely delve into in this episode. Firstly, as a personal trainer, and then as a strength and conditioning coach in the WAFL, Australian football competition, and in the WBBL with the Perth Scorchers. Now, we look at the protocols within the strength-based approaches to which he practiced when he was working with athletes, and also we talk about how he approaches his teaching as well. There's a lot of little golden nuggets in here for those in the industry, perhaps those who are thinking about getting and becoming a personal trainer or a strength coach, and for those who are already in the industry will probably be able to relate and take some well-needed truths away from this as well. Now, without further ado, guys, enjoy this conversation with Dan Jolley. All right, Dan, welcome to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast. Thank you for your time and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So as always, let's start off with a bit of an introduction about yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about, and everything in between.
Sure, no problem. Well, I currently teach fitness students, so I teach Cert 3 and 4 in fitness on the side, while I've been completing a PhD in educational psychology. That's looking at the knowledge and sources of information of personal trainers. Before that, I worked in industry for a long time as a personal trainer and worked in sport and did my previous degrees in exercise physiology.
Good man. And where have your studies taken you up to now?
Where?
Yeah.
Well, I've been in Perth the whole time, but if that's what you mean, location.
Or like in terms of more the science side of things, not just location-wise. Like where? No, you're right. British terminology. Where are you mainly wanting to go with it now, and what sort of, I guess, areas do you want to branch out into, if any?
Gotcha. Okay. Mate, that's a really interesting question because I don't have much of a plan and didn't have a plan when doing the PhD other than I had a question about the fitness industry that no one had answered. So I thought I'd answer it. So whether it takes me into further study or, different work or anything like that, I really don't know. It's been really fun to find out the answers to these questions and come up with more questions. And I'm enjoying trying to sort of spread the word and raise raise these issues in the fitness industry. But where it takes me, I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of the excitement, though, really, isn't it? Because there will always be more questions, and that is the beauty of science and any industry or anything you're passionate about. What are some of these specific questions that you wanted the answers to, and can you share some of the findings so far with us?
Yeah, I absolutely can. What really sort of got me thinking about it was, some of my colleagues in industry and whether it be teaching or whether in PT that were maybe not as curious as me. So, when challenged with new information or something that might contradict, a sort of sincerely held or long held belief, they would tend to sort of push it away or ignore it rather than ask a question and go, oh, I wonder why, or I wonder if I've got something wrong. So, so that got me curious because I've wanted to be right. Even if I'm wrong, it means once I find out I'm wrong, I'm closer to being right. So
it's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. So, being wrong isn't a bad thing as long as you correct it. So
Sure.
I'm really curious about why some people didn't want to correct it, and were happy to sort of push that stuff away. So, so I started doing a bit of reading, and some of my undergrad was in psychology as well. So sort of knew enough to start asking the right questions and then finding a supervisor to sort of help me out with it and take it further. But the main thing for me was looking at misconceptions in fitness. So what are the things that we think we know and we think we've known for a long time that are really wrong? And things that will, no matter how much extra information we've been exposed to, we still believe this thing that might be incorrect. Mm-hmm. And everybody has it. Everybody has these things in different areas, and usually we're not aware of it because that's why it's a misconception. But I wanted to find out where they came from and what we could do, if there was anything we could do to maybe correct those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I 100% understand where you're coming from, and I think this is going to be, now we're going to really unpack some interesting line of questions and I guess information, because there's so many misconceptions out there. And as we've talked about off camera, this is something that I'm really passionate about, because I think not just why these misconceptions exist, but also, again, what you said right there is, why do we continue to believe them? Why do we not ask a better question? And that kind of comes from having a scientific or a pragmatic approach in terms of, let's go, well, hang on a minute, let's ask a better question. Like the questions that I think we are ingrained to ask is, what's the best this, or what's the best thing going to get me for that, which is a very binary linear approach, where asking maybe, or learning to learn, like we learn to learn, or asking a better question of what maybe are some things I can do to move in this direction, rather than what's the best, because as we know, it's not just one thing. So to dive a little bit deeper, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you found from, again, your studies, but also working in the industry hands-on, and what have you done to try and slay, if I can use that word, the misconceptions, or rectify the misconception?
Okay, no problem. You actually raised something really interesting in your question there, which is often like that really binary approach is what I guess we start off with when you're really fresh and new in a field of knowledge, whatever that field is. So usually the more you learn and the more qualifications you get, the more sort of nuanced you are, and the more your answer becomes a bit more grey rather than black and white. So, and that's something that I try and teach my students too, is, their answer to a lot of questions should be, it depends. And then like, what does it depend on? And then we go through all the variables and here's what might change it, and here's what might change this. But most of the time, for most people, they're going to say this thing. But they need to appreciate that that's not always the case.
Just to interject, because I really want to ask you just to delve off that hook. See, that is my answer a lot of the time to people, and this is the paradox. I feel bad, but I tell them, look, I can't give you a one-word answer. I'll be doing you and myself a disservice. But at the same time, they might get that one-word answer from someone else, think they're better, or that's great, but then once they go down the rabbit hole, they're actually further away from their goals.
where the person who gave them the right answer looked like the person who was perhaps not as intelligent because they didn't give them the one word answer. Just quickly, what is your strategies for getting around that? How do you personally like to approach that scenario? Because I'm sure, like you said, you're in a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that ties in well with your previous question anyway, that usually it's about teaching complexity. So one of the research shows us that one of the ways to correct misconceptions is by increasing an awareness of the complexity of a topic. So the more you learn about it, like I said, the more you realize, there's all these other factors which contribute. And when we were identifying the misconceptions that we were going to survey people about and that we were going to try and correct, most of them ended up being an oversimplification of a correct answer. So, you might have gleaned enough information to get that far, but not far enough to really understand the other factors and the other influences. And then over time, maybe your understanding of what you learned might have regressed a bit, and you're left with this little misconception, this little bit of oversimplified information, which you're then spreading to clients. So when I'm saying I don't know, usually I'm explaining why I don't know. And if I'm working with the client, then I'm building the appreciation in the client of what a complex situation it is. So I'm saying I don't know because of X, Y, Z, or I don't know, but it might be this, and maybe here's who can tell you more, if not me.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that honest approach as well, which I think is important, because it's easy, I think, as well, when you get to a certain point in your career to have a stab. Now, it's not always a bad idea sometimes to recommend, but as a practitioner, it's not a good idea to work out of one's scope or prescribe or diagnose something that we are not able to do, purely based from a health and safety standpoint. But I think, like you said, deconstructing it and then saying, well, look, I don't know. Here's why. Sometimes then, like you said, being wrong can get you closer to being right. Because if you understand, well, it's like Edison, right? It was like he found so many ways not to make a light bulb, and then he found out how to make the light bulb. So it depends how you frame it in that respect. How do you then, with your students that you teach as well, how do you sort of progress that? So like you said, you're teaching them about, if I'm correct, what you said, the complexity of the scenarios, etc. Is this something that you do, I imagine, based on your surroundings, in a practical and a theoretical manner? So like a theory-based and then more of a practical-based environment? Is that sort of what you do? Yeah.
Yep.
When I was in New Zealand, I studied at an institution which I think is equivalent to TAFE, and it was called the Institute of Sport and Recreation. And I was quite fortunate because I got to do 50% theory and 50% practical. And I think one of the, and I'd love your opinion on this, problems with the industry is that there's not enough of each, but sometimes, especially in university or tertiary level, there's a lot of theory, which is the case in not just our industry, but many, but there's not enough really hands-on experience. And even then, it takes time. Like you can't just go, well, I've kind of done a bicep curl now, or I've taught someone to run around and do some high intensity interval training, and now I know it. It's like we have to spend a bit of time in there. So what strategies do you think we could put in place, from, in your opinion, your experience, to kind of raise that standard, or perhaps produce better quality personal trainers, not only within Australia, but just, from the get-go in learning facilities around the world?
Yep, absolutely. I think it's complex, and it's a really long game, because it's something that you're talking about, like an institutional change in the education system effectively. So because when in Australia, at least, we're really we're restricted by the level of the qualification we teach, and the time frame we have, and the amount of hands-on contact is going to depend on what we can charge, and funding, and all those sorts of things. So a Cert 3 and 4 is going to be a Cert 3 and 4 for a really long time. There's not much to do about that. And a degree, I think degrees are getting better. They sound a lot more hands-on from when I did mine 20 years ago. But they might still be quite theoretical. But I'm trying to improve an appreciation of extra qualifications and higher standards of qualification. So if somebody has a Cert 4, that's not the end of the journey. The way I tell my students is that's a beginning. And one of the things we found out from our research is that, and other research prior to mine, this isn't a new finding, but time in the industry doesn't equate to better knowledge. So that tells us that people who are going to PD and doing that sort of thing as part of their career probably aren't getting what they need to from that. So yes, self-directed PD isn't the answer. But we do know that a really good way to correct misconceptions is just higher levels of qualification, and it doesn't matter what level. So what we found, I surveyed a group of the general public, and those people who had higher levels of qualification in any field possessed fewer misconceptions in fitness and nutrition, just because they were aware of what they didn't know. So they'd been exposed to higher levels of learning in one field, and they can identify maybe their lack of learning in another field. So appreciating higher levels of qualification and seeking those. So if you've done a Cert 4, if you have the means, do a diploma, or go and do a degree, or if you've done your degree, have a look at an honours or a master's or something like that, or go to a doctorate if you find something you're passionate about, and that's going to help. But like I said, that's a really long game, and improving, I think, a trainer's appreciation of those qualifications. So understanding that, well, if this person's achieved this qualification, at that point they were assessed at a really high standard and they were competent at that standard. What they do after that is up to them, but that's maybe more than what another trainer might have achieved, and that probably counts for something.
Sure. Yeah. So like the continual learning aspect of it, aside from what you said, personal development, because again, that's very ambiguous what that can be, I guess. So at least the continual learning pattern there, like you said, it's a byproduct, isn't it? Because when you learn at a certain level and you are exposing yourself to that knowledge and that experience, automatically your level of thinking and problem solving and communication and language, etc., it all kind of upskills in alignment with that as well. And I think you're right, it's not just in our industry, it's kind of across. So if you're really passionate about what you do, it shouldn't be something where you go, well, I've got my minimum and now I'll just float.
That's right.
It's like, we should always be continually learning. And if you're passionate, as I said, like, you just will generally gravitate towards it. I know I do, and I am, and I'm always like, what's the next thing I want to do? What do I want to add on to it? But what's specific? And sometimes it's like you said, finding something you're really passionate about, or that niche, and then following that line. And as I put it now, instead of being a generalist, be a specialist, because there's so many elements that we can dive into now. And we see it a lot. I think I'll use the example in the more surgical industry side of things, medical industry. And now we have eye surgeons, and sometimes we have someone who's specific about the pupil. It's like getting really, really in the details where, we go back 10, 20, 30 years and it was a surgeon did a lot of things. But it's great now to see them focusing on those small parts as well.
Absolutely.
To segue out of that and into the next question, do you do a lot of hands-on work still yourself? Do you do any personal training, or is it more teaching your students the practical side of things?
It's mostly teaching, but until very recently, I was working as a strength and conditioning coach, which is really, really time intensive, and you're very hands-on with that. Not doing that at the moment, so I am seeing a few clients now just on the side, and just to stay in the game and have some fun working one-on-one. Instead of having 50 or 60 people to deal with when I'm a coach now, I've got one. I can spend an hour and a half with one person, and sort of be a little bit more detailed in my exercise prescription. So I do really enjoy that, but I probably enjoy it more because I don't do that much of it.
Yeah, it's finding that balance, isn't it? Because I think you can be overwhelmed if you've got too many numbers. But at the same time, if you really love what you do, I speak to a lot of advanced coaches, and they always It's like, man, you just can't beat the one-on-one. Like if you love what you do, it's great because, like you said, you can be in there, you can be intensive, you can be hands-on, you can be specific, and you can really sort of help people nut out, a better path, if you like. So, with all your experience as a strength and conditioning coach, did you mainly have like sport-specific athletes, or were they more physique athletes, etc.? Did you have a bit of a mix? So, what sort of
Yeah, well, I've never done physique work at all, so that's something that is a completely different thing, and I see that's a real trend in the industry that in the last sort of 5 or 10 years that's really blown up. So it's been interesting to watch that from the outside. So my work previously has been with teams. So I've done some volunteer work in American football. And I've done some work in Australian football here in Perth, and spent a bit of time with the Perth Scorchers in cricket. So so most of my work has been sports related.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great. So in terms of working with more the teams and the strength and conditioning side of things, what are some of the, I guess, main protocols or the most effective protocols that you found to be more advantageous from a practical standpoint rather than just a theory standpoint? So, for example, to contextualize this, and I'm asking this from the standpoint of the strength coaches and the strength and conditioning coaches listening who are probably thinking or are coaching, again, strength-based athletes in teams or are strength and conditioning coaches. Sometimes when we study, again, misconceptions, we say, hey, you do X, Y, and Z. But when we actually get in there and work with a team, we find, well, hang on a minute. That's not quite right. Maybe we're not programming exactly X, Y, and Z. We're programming more of X, more than Y, more than Z. Would you say that the science has changed much, really? Or is it pretty much, again, the basics have stood true and a lot of the minutiae and the misconceptions are exactly that? And again, people should go back to more of the basic strength and conditioning protocols rather than overcomplicating things.
Okay, yeah, gee, there's a lot to talk about there. I think.
Yeah, sorry, bam.
No, you're right.
Break it down.
Some of the misconceptions in sport specifically are more about might be discussions you have with the skills coaches. The skills coaches want as much time as possible doing skills. So the head coach of a footy team will say, well, can we get our conditioning out of our running? Or sorry, can we get our conditioning out of our skills training when we have footies in hand and doing things like that? And, you might spend quite a while explaining that, well, no, you can't really, or not to the same extent because of the intensity you're running at and the duration of the running and the intervals and things like that. But, that's something that pops up all the time, particularly at the lower levels. It's probably still a discussion that happens every few years at most AFL clubs, I'd imagine too. But that's a really common one. And so again, improving an awareness of what an S&C coach does compared to what the skills guys do is helpful there. What I found, something that's really changed in the last few years, is the idea of load management has become much more of an issue than what it was a few years ago. So looking at not just sort of, are we running enough and are we doing weights enough and are we getting stronger, but add it all up. So add all our on-feet work, add all our extra conditioning and all our strength work and all that sort of stuff, and how much are we asking the players to do and what toll is that taking on them? And it's, monitoring that is something that became more and more a part of my role. And even with some of my one-on-one people at the moment, I monitor their loads too, because one of the big predictors of injury that's been identified in the last few years is not doing enough. So, start them training, build them up gradually. So, don't spike their loads too quickly or they'll get hurt, and do enough in the preseason so that when they have those really big game days, they don't get hurt. So those are the really two big things that have come out of the research in the last few years, and the research has come out of what's been practiced sort of hands-on with these teams, and sort of monitoring that overall load and the way the players perceive that load is really important now.
Okay. So are we talking, like, obviously total volume and then
Yep.
increasing intensity over time, like having more like of an accumulation phase, and then more intensification. But I guess, like you said, managing it to a point where the athlete is not overreaching, so they
That's
can
right.
still recover for their, obviously more skill acquisition sessions and the cardiovascular based sessions, etc.
Yeah.
At the level that you've coached these athletes at, what are the general, or what are some of the example routines that you would give, say, a rugby player or an NFL, I believe, is it, player?
Yep.
How many strength and conditioning sessions per week? Like, what can you kind of build as a picture of what their program would look like, or how you have programmed it for? And I know this is, again, there's probably a lot of phases,
Yep.
but you can build as a bit of an example of how you generally approach that.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, this is something that's changed with experience too. And I'm spending more time thinking about the individual's needs rather than the sport's needs. Or that's more of a 50-50 proposition now, whereas I might have been really worried about what the sport needed previously. And if you have a look at something like American football, you think, gee, they're big and they're powerful and, they have lots of rest, but gee, they need to hit hard. And, so you think about their power needs and their strength needs and their size needs. But so you want to apply all this load and you want them squatting heavy and you want them doing, maybe variations of Olympic lifts or something like that. But if they can't move well, you can't do that. So, if they can't squat safely, if they can't, if they can't control their body weight, or if they're injured and you need to manage that injury, then they can't do any of those things anyway. So, my approach at the moment with some of the guys I'm working with is maybe only in the gym 2-3 days a week, depending on what they started with. So if they weren't doing anything at all, it might be twice. If they were training 2 or 3 times in the off season, it might go up to 4 in the pre-season with their gym. But if they've got kids, I might only make it 2, because they're getting less sleep and all those sorts of issues. So they all need to lift heavy in that case, and they all need to do some sort of explosive work. But what I program is going to depend so much from person to person before I even start looking at the sport or the position that they play or anything like that. So, it's hard to get too specific, to be honest.
No, that's understandable. So it's very individualized to each of the players or the athletes in the team. And again, like taking them through like a general physical preparedness to a degree to get them before we go, like, again, sport specific movement. So I guess you've always got, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I would interpret it is like you've got a bit of a map, if you like, and you've got, point A, point B, and each player, you've got to try and navigate them and get to that point. But as we know, it's not a straight line because they've got families, they've got injuries. Some players, like you said, they can't move in a squat, but then some players might be really strong on a bench press. And I guess that's what makes it fun as a coach, because it's like, oh, cool, it's not just this and this and this, and that gets a bit boring. Let's talk about, because something, and again, this is something I'm interested in because I'm just like to talk about this sort of stuff, I guess, and learn more about how other strength coaches program. How do you manage that in terms of a time and also a logistic aspect of, if you've got, say, I don't know, 30 or 20, do you manage all the players? Do you have other strength coaches within these teams? And are you delivering this programming now via electronic forms? And if so, what do you use? Excel spreadsheets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, so now I'm only doing one-on-one stuff, and I'm working with half a dozen people. So basically, and I've got a pretty well-equipped gym at home, so people come and see me, and I spend an hour or 2 hours with them, and I really take my time, and we just program there and then, and I might see them once a month, to do some testing and update their programs. So that's really intensive and one-on-one, and that's something that I love doing. And it's not something I'm charging them for. I'm just helping out these guys because it's fun, and and that's my hobby. And teaching and study is my day job. But I've been in the other situation working for semi-professional AFL clubs where we have 50 guys on our list. So we can't do that. and it would be me and a rehab coach and a strength coach. So you just can't program individually for that number of guys, and not everyone's going to, and not everyone's going to turn up to training every session. They turn up a lot, but not all the time. So in that case, it's more of you design your template, right? Here's what the session is for this month, or here's what the 2 or 3 sessions are for this month. And then when the players get into the gym, you make your adjustments and you're right. So I know you can't do this, and I know you need to use this variation, or, I know you can't squat, so we're just going to do this with you, or we're going to use a box with you, or you're going to do a leg press, or you're going to use a band, or, so you end up with maybe 8 or 10 different variations to suit those guys. And then they remember what their variations are, or you write those down for them and give them a modified version. So I've been at both extremes of being able to spend hours on one person and then having 50 guys and half an hour to knock a program up, and then, you adjust it as you go. I know I prefer the one-on-one time, but it doesn't always happen.
For sure. And that makes sense, but that is interesting, actually. And just to kind of understand the dynamics behind that, would you say that's the difference between, say, the most elite sport teams, like, for example, Manchester United? Everyone knows Man United, one of the biggest, if not the most popular sports in the world, football, soccer. And something that I've looked at and I find interesting is obviously the resources they have for rehabilitation. Like they're the first on the cryogenic therapy and all this, that, and the other. So apart from obviously the facilities, do you think the difference and the standard in coaching is more about the hands-on, or they would have more, again, not just Man United, but the teams with the best money, do they just have more strength coaches who can be more individualistic? Or do you think that they have, or they're using different strategies? Like, I guess to put it into a question specifically, what is the cutting edge of strength and conditioning performance now for sport-specific athletes?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer
in your
cutting edge necessarily. Sorry?
In your experience, though, I guess, from your standpoint.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, I can give you a really good example in that, in the time I spent at the Scorchers, for example, like load management was a really big issue, and particularly with fast bowlers. They track their bowling loads pretty carefully about how much they're bowling in sessions and how much they're bowling in games, and, avoiding those spikes in load that we talked about earlier. They treat fast bowling the way I would treat, kilometers somebody's run, or, reps and, weight they've lifted and things like that. So they've got software that handles that, and the players have an app on their phone, and they get up each morning and they answer a few quick wellness questions, and then they put in what the training was from the day before and how hard they rated each session. So just the old, session RPE times time, how long the session was. And they can use that and manipulate, that information as much as they need to. And, they've got a piece of software that, Cricket Australia has a piece of software that where every under 17 and up player in the country enters their information into that app, and Cricket Australia sees everything, and each of the states see their contracted players, and all that information is shared and used to modify training if they need to. Go down a level into sort of semi-professional stuff. We're using the same system, but we're using a clipboard and some paper, and we're getting those scores manually rather than using a phone app. And then plugging it into an Excel spreadsheet rather than using the software. So I don't think there's any difference in how you apply that, that system, for example. And I don't think there's any difference in how you might program necessarily either. I think if you go to Man U, they might complain about not having enough time as well. But what they consider enough time is going to be really different, because what they want to do is again, next level. So I don't think any SC coach feels they've got enough time. You just, when you have more time, you find more things to do and better ways of using that information. So, so it's always hard.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a good point you make. I guess, like you said, it's like the whatever income you earn, you live to your means, right? Or you live to your resources. And if you've got less, you do more with it. And if you've got more, but then you do more and you earn more, you spend more, and kind of that
That's
way
right.
around things. But I
That's right.
guess it is more, like you said, it's more the resources, but the basics and the science, I don't think, again, has changed. I mean, there's always studies coming out, but again, until we can actually get enough evidence or conclusive evidence, which usually takes years and years and years to draw those and go, well, we definitely know this works. We're not going to be seeing any major changes, I guess, anytime. What are
I guess the one thing.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry, mate. I was just going to say, I guess the one thing that might happen in professional sport is, as you say, it might take decades to get conclusive evidence about something, whereas they wouldn't wait. So they might do their own research and go, well, we think this works and it's not going to hurt and we can afford it, so we'll do it. And they do it just in case it does work, and then they can always drop it if it doesn't work.
I suppose so. That's a fair point, actually. If you've got the resources and the money and you know it's not detrimental, and even if it's a placebo, if it works, right? I guess so. Yeah, I've always found that actually interesting. I guess in some of the top teams and some of the stuff they do, you think, oh, I don't know about that, but again,
that's right.
But if we know it's not going to hurt, what's the harm in trying?
Exactly.
So conversely to your coaching and your approaches and your experience, what are some of the things, or maybe we talked about this before, when you've got it wrong or mistakes you've made? What are some of the, if you don't mind talking about them, perhaps mistakes you've made when programming or coaching, and what were they? How did you sort of, I guess, navigate around them? So if you could go back and, I guess, speak to your younger self, what's some of the advice that you'd give yourself for some of the younger coaches probably listening and tuning in?
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Made plenty of mistakes. I think back to my first season of professional coaching with the footy club, and it was just a disaster. We didn't train enough, and our loads weren't high enough, and players got hurt, and there were other factors. I'm not taking all the blame for it, but I'll be fortunate. But going into that was, and this might sort of get us back to some of the other stuff, is I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought I was, I'm halfway through a master's. I know a little bit. I can go in here and maybe have a good crack at this. And 6 months into the job, I realised I didn't have a clue. And I was learning a lot as I went along. So these days I'm faster to ask a question and faster to ask for other people's help. And not to say that I wasn't doing that before, but I needed to do it more. And I think if you ask every young kid in their 20s or straight out of uni, you really think you're the bee's knees. And it's it's 2 years or 5 years or 10 years before you realise that, actually I'm a bit of an idiot, and I think I need to ask this person or this person.
Yeah. 100%. It's true. I appreciate excuse me, I appreciate your honesty as well, because I think that's the mark of someone who's reached a certain level, and that mindset of, you know what, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to go out my way to make them, but
Right.
I'm going to balls it up, if you like, sometimes, and asking for help and being confident enough to ask someone for help and say, look, I'm not really sure about this, or for example, maybe I need a bit of help with that, rather than just winging it, which I think a lot of, in my experience, a lot of young professionals do, because again, you're right, the mindset, you come out, you bulletproof, it's that whole like phase you go through anyway, which I think we've all been through, hold my hands up, something we have, and then sort of need to be taken down a peg, or you need to be humbled. Or for example, if you can get some guidance and some good mentorship, it can save you a lot of time and frustration, and also other people as well, of injuries, just getting that sort of scripted advance and going, hey, look, you're onto something there, really great, but hey, have you tried this? And I think the way you approach that as well is important. So my next question for you is, when you're teaching your students, what do you find is some of the most effective approaches in communicating that information? And now to put this in a scenario, for example, I know we've all been there. We're a personal trainer, we're in a gym. We see a client, or well, not a client, a gym guy doing something not just wrong, but dangerous. Now, right. I personally feel obligated as a coach, because I think, well, if I don't step in and I've seen it, that's just as negligible as someone, maybe overdosing or something, to a degree, especially if it's a main compounder. Have you been in that scenario? I'm sure you have. And how do you approach it without, because I think a lot of trainers are intimidated, going, no, I can't just, especially if it's maybe a stronger gentleman who might be perhaps, throwing some weight around, and it's like, you might not feel confident. Do you have any advice that you give to personal trainers of how to maybe approach that and sort of offer some better advice without getting your head ripped off?
In that situation, I don't know that I do, because particularly in the situation you say, if they're a big guy and they're throwing some weight around, if you're not as big as them, they may not want to hear about it, and I'm a pretty small guy. So, I think if they don't know you and they don't trust you, it's always going to be really hard to change somebody's opinion about that. So particularly if they're a physique athlete, or if they're a power lifter or something like that, a lot of their identity is put into their training, and a lot of sort of how they express themselves and what they think about themselves is related to their training. So it's really hard to tell them that they're doing something wrong, because they're not going to take that well. So you've built a rapport with them already, and we're playing the long game here, so it might take you a couple of months of building a rapport and getting them to trust you, and you might sort of show them something that they didn't know, or when you're discussing something, they might learn something from you, and then they come to you with a question, and you've got the answer for them, and then you're like, hey, I noticed something about this. Why are you lifting that way? Or, has anyone taught you that? Or do you notice how your technique changes when you get tired? Or, I don't think you can just walk up to them when it's a part of their identity, because people are really threatened by that, and they're gonna shut it down. It's not a satisfactory way of handling it. If it's your gym or your studio, you can just tell them to stop. But if you're a PT and you're paying rent somewhere, it's I think you've just got to tread gently.
Yeah, and I like the point you made about there of identity, which is really important, because it is like the iron game, if you will, is a culture. It is a way of life. I know it's something that I love. I'll do it forever, and I know there's millions of people out there who feel the same way. And you identify yourself as, or it becomes sometimes who you define yourself as, which is not good if it's the whole character, because you do need to have some sort of segregation, in my opinion. But you're right, you do. People categorize themselves. You say to someone, what do you do? Or people will see that you lift and go, what do you do? And really, it shouldn't have to be that you do anything. If you just enjoy lifting weights, then you enjoy lifting weights. But sometimes I think people feel obligated, or if they are part of this, like you said, this a group or a collective, it's no, I'm a powerlifter and I dress this way, I listen to this music, and I got my SPD knee sleeves, which I have, so I love, or I'm a bodybuilder. And it's a shame, because I don't know if you've or had to listen to Iron Culture by Eric Helms, and they talk about the culture of physique sports and strength and conditioning, and how we're segregated, but really we're all part of the same family. So I think going back to the question, I think that's good advice. Tread carefully, because you might have to find an in somewhere else by later on. Like you said, just saying, it might even be just hello. Hello turns into a conversation at the front desk, turns into a conversation on the gym floor, turns into a, hey, have you tried this? Or I know you're into lifting. Have you tried the low bar squat or whatever it might be? I know that when I was young and very full of energy, I always found it hard, because I wanted go and be like, oh no, don't do that. But that's the worst thing you can do, is say, oh, don't do that, or don't do it this way. And I actually spoke to, it was an older personal trainer at the time in the first gym in New Zealand where I trained, and she said, if you want to approach someone, if you do feel confident, always say, hey, I noticed you were doing this. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried, by any chance, trying it this way? Because I found, and then use a third person or use some actual anecdotal evidence. And, it sounds really simple, but I never thought of that. And to this day, if I do approach someone, I generally introduce myself and will have that line of general, like you said, like inquiry, like inquisitiveness, like I'm just interested and I want to help you. Have you offer not a solution, but an alternative, which in your head may be the solution. But you're just giving them, again, a possible, oh yeah, without, hey, you're doing it wrong. Because like you said, you might offend someone, and that's not what we want to do in this game. But I think sometimes what we do is as much being a good communicator as it is a coach as well.
That's right.
In many ways. When I guess with your students, in terms of when you're in the gym environment with them, now I imagine you have a variety of age groups. Am I right?
Yeah, we have as young as 16 and as old as sometimes 65.
Yeah. Well, oh wow. So that's pretty cool that you're still getting people through at any age, because it's never too late, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that there's a bit of a segregation in terms of the younger and the older in terms of learning, where the misconception of if you're a little bit older, you can generally grasp it a bit faster based on your experience? Or do you think that it just comes down to the attitude of the individual that's learning, that you're coaching?
Yeah, I think it's really different, because we get some students that are there because they don't know what else to do and fitness sounded kind of easy or interesting. Mm-hmm. We get other people who it's a lifelong passion and something that they want to turn into a vocation. So sometimes it's really hard to change some of those entrenched views. But again, if that older person comes from, say, other education and they've done qualifications somewhere else, like they've got a degree in something and then they're coming back for more study, they're wonderful, just because they're curious, and they want to learn, and they're just sponges, so but some of the younger kids are too, but others aren't. So I actually asked my kids the graduating group last year, and we actually I surveyed them on a couple of things and asked them some questions that I'd asked them in week 1 of the year, and then asked them at the end of the year, and sort of saw what the difference was. And then I asked them, right, so how much do you reckon you know now? If you had to rate yourself in the fitness industry, how much do you know compared to the next person? And they're like, oh, a little bit, not much. I'm okay, I guess. And then my next question was, how much did you think you knew when you rocked up in the first week? And the boys particularly were, oh, I knew everything, or I thought I knew everything. Like, how much do you actually know? No, I was an idiot. I didn't know anything. So I really loved seeing that, like, just that they appreciated that, and they knew, they knew so much more, but they weren't less confident, I guess, but they were more aware of their limitations and more aware of what other people could do to help them. And I think that's great, and that's really important. I think I've wandered off the question there, but
no, I'm glad you did, because thanks for sharing. That's really good information, because it shows that the mindset and the change and the growth that they've gone through to go, not only to admit it, but been like, oh, actually, I didn't really know that much at all. But you don't know what you don't know until you do it. And then it's about that awareness, right? It's like, oh, and now I'm consciously incompetent. And then hopefully, I can move on to the next stages and so forth. So to kind of springboard off that question, it sounds to me like coaching or teaching, I should say, has made you a better coach, a better communicator, a better trainer. If you would agree with that, how do you think it has mainly improved your ability as a trainer by teaching other trainers, if you will, in the industry?
Yeah, I don't know. It's I'm probably happy to take it slower and One of the approaches I use a lot now is getting people to tell me what they know, rather than me telling them what they know. So I really like to draw attention to what the gaps in the knowledge are. And when we look at correcting misconceptions, that's a really effective approach, rather than saying, no, you're wrong, it's actually this. It's more, okay, so what do you know, or what do you think about that? Now, how do you know, or why do you think that? And get them to try and explain a bit. And if they can't, well, okay, so you've explained this bit, but what about this bit here? And, I don't know, I'm not sure. I heard somewhere. Where'd you hear it from? I don't know. Or I read it online. Well, what did the guy online know? I don't know. So, once you identify where the gaps are, and it may not be everything's wrong, it might just be, they're okay with this, but they're not so good with this. And, you identify that gap, and then you can guide them to an answer, give the information that you need to, and then sort of help them. If they're curious enough, they'll sort of pick it up from there. And dealing with clients, it's the same thing now. I'm asking, okay, where'd you hear that? And, or how do you know? And what do you think that means for your training? And then, have you considered this? And, no, I haven't. What should I do instead? I'm like, well, okay. And then you can jump in and give them a bit of extra information. But again, it's a long game, and it takes a bit of patience and takes a bit of conversation, I guess.
Yeah, but it's good though, because you're almost empowering the other person to, like you said, guiding them towards a solution, rather than just that whole, here, let me give you the answer, or do it this way, or this is the way. You're better.
The only thing I'd suggest there, is that requires both parties to be engaged too. So now, I'm saying this is a best case scenario. There's plenty of times when I just have to tell somebody no, particularly a student. I've got to say, no, you've got to do this. And, well, I think it's this. I'm sorry, it's not. And here's why. And if you don't agree, that's fine. But here's what you have to do. So if they can't engage, you can't make them engage.
Yeah, for sure. I think it takes a certain level of thinking to guide and lead someone to come up to their own conclusions. I know I'm just thinking when you're talking of scenarios that's happened to me, and I had one teacher in particular, and I thought he was just being really hard on me and like almost picking on me, because I'm like, why are you always making it so hard for me? And he literally, I did a presentation on creatine, on a hydrate, and he just destroyed me in front of the class, like in a good way. Like he just kept asking me these questions, and I was stood there and I couldn't really give him the answers, because as a sports scientist, it's important for us to not have a bias approach. And what I had done is, because I knew creatine, or had evidence behind it, I was biased towards it. And he was teaching me that you've got to your job here, or in this particular assignment, was to show the findings for and against, present the evidence as a whole, where he said, you were kind of for creatine. It was very obvious. And he just asked me some, like you, which I think is really good, why did you come to that conclusion? Where did you find that in this? And I just thought he was being rough. But, he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, look, I'm doing this for your own benefit. And I think now, and looking back on the studies in the class, I'm glad he did that. And, he made me a better student. He made me ask better questions. He made me reference things a whole lot better, and make sure that I wasn't just plucking things out of the air, which, we're all guilty of once again. But I look at a lot of my fellow students, and there's only 2 of us who successfully work in the industry now. And I think maybe if I didn't turn up and apply myself, and when I thought a lot of the tutors were being hard on me, maybe it's because I was always the one asking questions, or, turning up, and they were like, oh, this person is obviously interested, and they just nailed me. But it was a good thing. So I like that, Dan. I like that approach. I think it's important to kind of, I guess, be cruel to be kind sometimes, or if you can spend that time and make people think a little bit more, which I think is important.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And there was something I wanted to. Oh, yeah. So when we had a chat off camera before we started, we talked about the ask a better question, and you said something that I really enjoyed. The answer is it depends a lot of the time. So when someone asks you something and we can't, and a lot of people will be nodding their head now listening to this. If someone goes, hey, what's the best exercise to build strength?
Yep.
And well, can you tell me more? Like, what do you do? Is this the same technique you employ when you get these questions, when you can engage with someone by saying, okay, can you tell me more? Or how do you get your students to ask better questions? Or how do you get your athletes and clients to ask better questions? And how do you educate them so they can start, again, learning themselves and sort of drawing their own conclusions rather than, again, looking for that magic pill or, again, the binary one-dimensional approach, which we talked about?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can create curiosity it's rare to create curiosity in somebody who's not curious. So if that exists beforehand, then great. If they want to learn, fantastic. If they don't, it can be a real challenge. But the early answer, early on in a course or with limited levels of knowledge is, it's got to be like this. And if you're not doing it like this, you're doing it wrong. Again, asking questions, poking holes in that, like, well, what about in this situation? Or what about with this type of person? What would you do differently then? One thing I really love talking about is squat technique. And now, not because I'm a master of squat technique or I'm a better coach than anyone else, but because some of the recent research is just showing that it's so variable and there are so many different ways people might squat, depending on anatomy and depending on mobility and depending on their movement competency and other injury issues and things like that. So you might end up coming with a group of 10 people, you might have 6 or 7 different variations of how somebody squats or just the way they move. And just drawing attention to those differences. So like, hey, have a look at how short this person's Achilles tendon is, or have a look at how tight this person's glutes are, or have a look at how long this person's femur is, or have a look at how stiff this person's back is, or have a look at how much this person shakes and the valgus knee, and you look at all those different issues and you're going to get a different squat compared to the person next to you. So so identifying the complexity, and then now what would you do about it, guys? And usually the answers are pretty mixed. You get some good ones and some bad ones, but you just get them thinking about it. And if I need to, I can point to some research. So I know part of Mark McKean's PhD was looking at squat mechanics, and he summarized his whole study up with, if it looks good, it probably is. And if it,
I like
looks
that.
done,
Simple.
It's so simple, and it was a great talk. I saw him talk about 10 years ago, and I've remembered it ever since, because it was such a sharp, snappy way to summarize that research. And some of the research on back pain at the moment by Peter O'Sullivan at Curtin University does a lot of stuff on that, and looking at the movements that injure people's backs. And we now know, well, it's not the movement so much, it's the load. So somebody could deadlift badly, but if they're using a light enough weight, or they're strong enough to deadlift badly, it's probably okay. And if they're not strong enough, that's when they're going to get injured. So highlight the complexity, highlight the differences, talk about why, talk about how you can fix it. But some of this is in the eye of the beholder as well. So there's a little bit of subjective opinion that we need to be aware of as well, I think, in some of that stuff.
Yeah, no, sure. And you're right. I think certain people are just, again, curious or ask better questions, or, again, we all think differently. I think, some people will gravitate and change and coagulate over time, but for the most part, like you said, you will always get, that one person who's always got the hand up, or is always a bit more inquisitive, which again is part of the challenge. But I like what you were talking about then with the studies, in terms of that, keeping it simple. And this is something I've really struggled with my whole life, is keeping things simple and not overthinking and not overcomplicating. And even, I just think the way my mind works is, second guessing it or going, it needs to be more advanced. And to give a real life example for people listening, and I'm going to get your opinion on this in a second.
Yep.
When I came out of studying and I went in my first personal training position, which was in New Zealand, in the bodybuilding gym, or the most serious gym, and I've written this program up for this client. And I remember the client leaving the gym because they went sick, and my boss at the time, who was ex SAS, and he strength and conditioning coach. He had a lot of experience, and he came up to me and goes, "Oh, Alex," he goes, "I just saw your client run out the gym," and I said, "Oh yeah, I was wondering where they went." He went, "Oh, they were a bit put off. They went sick," and he's like, well, "What did you do with them?" And anyway, long story short, I'd given them something that was for a lot of a higher level or an athlete, because I took directly from my studies, even though I'd done the practical, but I'd not had the key element of experience. And I was still, just getting a bit of guidance. And yeah, he just said, "Oh, like you actually don't have to make it that complicated, especially for general population or, the clientele we have here." He says, "Most of these people are not physique athletes, or they're not going to be, at the top of their game." So he says, "You can," and it took him to show me how simple. And I said, "Oh, well, that's boring." And he went, "Yeah." He goes, It can be," he says, "but this is good learning for you to learn this, and then you can progress. And this is where you might find you want to work with sports teams, or you might want to work with elite athletes, etc." So, in terms of how you coach and from your experience of teaching, how important is it to try and keep things simple? And what are some of the things you can do, again, for coaches and personal trainers upcoming, to try and keep things simple? Or what tools can you apply to not overthink, if any, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think separating yourself from the client's really important. So what's simple and boring to us might be quite a challenge to the client. Or the athlete, depending on their training history. So, we might have seen a goblet squat for 10 years and we're sick to death of them. But for somebody who's never done it, and for somebody who's learning and building strength and needs to control their body better, like that's just the exercise for them. So, we don't have to do, supersets or cluster sets or drop sets or use bands or chains or anything like that if it's not needed. So we're just, I just remember we're trying to apply a stimulus to get a response, and let's apply a good stimulus, like apply enough, but not too much. And when our client adapts to that stimulus, then we change it, and then we might do something interesting. So for me, it was always the second and third program that was much more fun than the first program, because you see how they've changed, and that's when you start getting interesting. Or when somebody's got 12 months under their belt and you can throw in something really good straight away and they just get it. So that's a lot of fun. But like all jobs, 80% of it, 90% of it is sort of the stock standard. You've got a brand new weight loss client, or you're writing a program for somebody who's a first timer, and the other 10% is the stuff that's really interesting and fun.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I like what you said about then, like you said, separating it, because you can go, "Well, I've seen this," but then, well, if it's relevant for the client, like you said,
that's right.
And this is the best procedure, and proceed on. And like you said, that progression should always be there, which is maybe where we have to focus on some more of the details in terms of, it is progressing, it is exciting, especially when you can see that client actually evolve. But I agree with what you're saying in terms of like second and third programs, albeit that someone is adherent to it. When you see that, and then you see the change sometimes in mindset as well, which is nice. And then I think that's part of the best feeling we can get as trainers and coaches, because seeing someone change, mentally and physically for the better is very rewarding. Because it's like when you clean a room, you can see what you've done. You go, I see it. But with training, it takes a little longer than a couple of hours.
I actually really like the point you made earlier. You made it a while ago about having the end point in mind, knowing where they're starting from, knowing where you want to get to. And with progressing your programming, it can be the same thing. And I've done this in a really complicated way when I'm working with the team and I'm periodizing, and we have every session for 3 months planned out, before the preseason starts. Or also done it with some of the guys I'm working with at the moment, where, I know where they want to be, or I know where I want them at the start of the season. I know what they're capable of doing now. Next month, we're going to change this. Next month, our rep range is going to drop a little bit. Next month, we're going to introduce a little more power, or we're going to vary this position a little bit, or I'm going to add a band to this movement, so it can be relatively unstructured like that, or it can be a massive spreadsheet that you spend days working on if you need to. But yeah, just be progressive and be sensible.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's like that you re-raise, like starting with the end point in mind, and sometimes, like you said, reverse engineering it, like any goal, working backwards. You go, right, well, if we need to be here, well, first of all, is it possible? Yeah. Okay, so then what do we need to do? And then sort of programming accordingly. I find something that I try and do with my clients is, and I had a new client ring me up before we were on the call, and I try to set expectations. I think this is important for any professional, to let people know what is going to happen before it happens, and then educating them, because people come to us, and I'm sure you've had this, and you go, hey, look, first of all, how can I help you? And they're like, I want to lose 10 kilograms of fat in like 10 weeks, and I want to gain 12 kilos of muscle. And I'm exaggerating, but well, some people say this, and you go, okay, great. And it's like, okay, let's just first have a chat about what's possible, because this is going back to, again, what we said off camera. We've got black, we've got white, we've got gray. This is a gray area. How fast can we gain muscle? How fast can we lose fat? But they're not how fast, but what is optimum? And I use air quotes for people listening, because that is what is optimum at the end of the day. Sometimes the best program or the best way is whatever you can stick to, whether that's a slower rate or a faster rate. But they're obviously, again, we've got studies. We kind of know time frames, and obviously we can accumulate and lose fat faster than we can assimilate, muscle, just purely based on its genetic makeup, etc. But again, if you don't explain this to someone who has come to you going, no, but I'm going to pay you money to help me get this result, you're kind of doing them and yourself a disservice. And that comes back to the whole question of, again, not asking a better question, but I'm saying it depends, and then setting expectations as well. What sort of, again, when you've been or had the time to with your clients, have you found that trying to establish the knowledge as you progress someone through the program has helped them? Or sometimes are you just very depending on the person? Look, this is what we've got to do. This is how we're going to do it. Or do you try and kind of spend that bit of time, I guess, educating them so that they are, again, they know the whys behind what they're doing, rather than, the misconceptions? Because a lot of people come and go, well, I've obviously got to do cardio. And you go, well, not necessarily.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. I think back when I first started doing PT, I probably wanted to educate everybody, but not everyone wants educating. Some people just want to train and be told what to do. And for other people, it's a part of their week that even if they don't achieve their goal, they're going to stick with you for years and years because they enjoy it and they get something else out of it, even if their goal sort of gets forgotten or falls by the wayside. So, appreciate those people. And then I think a good business strategy and a good programming strategy is under promise, always. So, whatever you can achieve, just knock 20 or 30% off that and tell them that, so that way, you're not going to disappoint them if they don't quite get there, but gee, you're going to look good if they do, and if they get there ahead of schedule. So, and if they want, to be honest, if they want to go to somebody else who's going to promise the world, let them go, because they're either going to get disappointed when I tell them it can't happen, or they're going to get disappointed when it doesn't happen. So either way, you don't have a long-term client.
That's true. There's some really good points that you make there as well, again, from your experience. And I want to sort of extend that, because recently I had a conversation with a fellow coach this morning about some inferences that I've gauged from, working with people over my time. And the biggest thing is I found is that like anything, we are the only people who get in our own way, but most people can't string 2 weeks together.
Yes.
In terms of they're either, look, it's simple, right? It's sleep, it's nutritionist training at the very generalized sort of zoomed out look.
Yep.
What's the hard bit? It's life. It's not as easy as turning up and getting to sleep and eating, because if it was, everyone would be looking phenomenal. But what I found is, even when you provide that information, I'm finding that with the coaching, a lot of it is, again, giving people these simple processes and procedures, systems and strategies to be able to actually do the basics. And sometimes it's 6 weeks or 6 months before I even get them doing something which is, more congruent with actually, now we're actually making progress. Just because you have to build these, and I think I use the word keystone habits is what I would say, because they don't have them in there. But it's amazing just to look back and go, wow, like, it's so easy, but most people are just getting sick from drinking, or they're just not doing the basics. Like, and maybe this is a bit of frustration coming through from me as a young coach. And I'm like, look, if you could only see how simple it is, and you just got to turn up. but I guess it's different when you love it. Is this something that you've experienced? And if so, what's your thoughts on that? Do you have any tips, advice? Because I'm sure there's a whole lot of people listening who are coaches and trainers going, yes, how do we motivate our clients? And I like to put the onus back on myself. Now, I know at the end of the day, at some point, your client's got to come to the party, right? But I try to take ownership and go, no, how can I be a better coach? How can I, talk to Jim, to Joe, to Catherine, and get it across in a way where maybe they'll get it? Because I know maybe I can. Maybe I can say it in a different way, and maybe they'll click. And I know it's definitely worked. But then how do you know when maybe you have to have that conversation of, hey, look, do you really want to do this? I don't know if it's working. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, it's like I say, life gets in the way, all the time. So, and I've been on the other side of this. I think back to when I was a sports person, and the mistakes I made in my 20s in my early 20s compared to how hard I trained and how right I did it in my late 20s was, they're just different worlds. And it's, I was the same person, just at a different stage of my life. And, when I was 29, 30 and at the end of my career, I was asking for help. I was seeing my dietitian, I was seeing my physio, I was sleeping properly, I was, laid off the booze and all that sort of stuff. And I did everything the opposite way in my early 20s, so, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I see that in my clients and in, athletes I work with as well. And sometimes you just got to let people make their mistakes. You can tell them, but until they experience it, it doesn't always sink in. It's in psychology, we talk about the availability bias, like where something's more important to us when it happens to us rather than when somebody else is telling us about it. So I can tell you that you need to monitor your training load and not do too much too soon, but until you get hurt, you're not going to pay attention. And this happened to somebody the other day. A really good football player I'm working with. She's wonderful and she's a great client. I really love working with her, but she's got she's history of knee injuries and hamstring problems and things like that. And we started training, and we're a little conservative, and she had an opportunity to do some more training, and she went and did it and did tons of plyos and sled pushes and things like that. And she got hurt, and then she had to see a physio. Physio told her exactly what I'd been telling her, which is, oh, you did too much and you should have stuck with this. And it's great. She's hearing it in both ears, from the physio on one ear and me in the other ear. And she came in to see me the other day, and I'm like, so you're going to pay attention now, aren't you? She's like, sure will. And yeah, we could have stopped that from happening. But on the other hand, now she really appreciates training loads and that you can't spike your loads. And I don't have to explain that ever again. So it doesn't solve the problem, like that had to happen, but sometimes it has to, because that is far more meaningful to her than any link I can provide or any study I can talk about or any spreadsheet I can send.
Sure. So I guess it's like you just got to sometimes learn the hard way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone does.
Yeah. At some point or another, I guess we've all been there, as hard as it is, like you said. And it's not like oh, I told you so. But it's funny you say that. I'll be honest with you, Dan, the same client, messaged me this morning. He's so motivated. And I said, look, we've got to build up this volume. Okay. I've explained it all. But I see him there and he gets really like, oh, I can do that. I got to get, and I'm like, no, it's not about being hardcore. It's not about, but I love his energy. And I said, look, I love you. Use this. I said, but be patient. Time moves fast. But same thing. He's putting too much weight on the bar. He's done some RDLs and he's pulled his load back. And he's like, dude, I can't train now. I said, you can't do the one thing that you love, right? Yeah. And he goes, I should have backed off, shouldn't I? Like you told me to. I said, yes. I said, the weight will come. Strength is a skill. Raw strength will get you so far. And then you just have to, again, hence the name, strength and conditioning. Condition the body over time to the loads. But now he gets it. And I bet you, just like your example there with the female athlete, I hope he won't do that again for a long time or ever. Yes. Because that's a hard lesson, because he's not been able to train for a week and he loves it. So I said, listen, and again, the physio sort of backed me up. So funny you mentioned that, because ironic, it's a similar solution. But yeah, it's definitely something we've, if we could only avoid that, but maybe not a bad thing. Dan, before my final question and before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask you some what I call rapid fire questions, just some fun, lighthearted questions, shows a bit of a human element. And again, it's just a bit of fun at the end of the day. So just answer as honestly as you can, whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong. Okay, so the first one is, if you had one last meal or you had to eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be? What's your favorite?
Oh, chicken curry.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Nice. Korma?
No, Thai.
Yeah, fair enough. Good choice. Very popular, the old Thai around these parts now as well.
Yeah, very.
All right. If you had a superpower, or you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
Time travel. I'll go back and correct all my training mistakes from when I was a young kid in my 20s.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be tempting, the time travel, just to dabble in and out, etc.
Absolutely.
A little bit of a heavier one. Do you think we go anywhere after we die? Do you think there's been, again, more of a scientist approach? Do you think there's anything after the body stops breathing, switches off? Is there anything else?
Well, I'll say there's no evidence that there is.
That's true. This is very true. And conversely, if you could choose to live forever, would you?
No, because then you'll lose any appreciation of what you had.
Yeah, and I think that's an appropriate answer, definitely. And it's definitely interesting how people have different opinions on that one, because it makes you think sometimes. I don't know, but like you said, would life be precious? Would we value time? Would we value each other?
Yeah, that's right.
Do we even do that enough now?
Well, yeah.
Debatable.
Big question. Yeah.
It is. And my last question, Dan, on a more serious note is, and this is one I ask all my guests, and it's identifying or a fear and sharing a fear that you've had. It might be a major fear, some adversity you've faced within your career. What was it, or what was one of those times, or a major fear that you had, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn from it by overcoming that fear?
Yeah, I think, I'll stay on topic, I think. And something that really bothered me when I was younger was just being wrong, like just so afraid of being wrong. And I still am. Well, I'm not afraid of it now. I worry about it. Like, I make sure I'm right, and I want to know that I'm not wrong. But, I'm okay with being wrong, because as I mentioned earlier, it's, being wrong is an opportunity to be more right, and an opportunity to learn more. And I'd rather be wrong knowing that I then got it right than just, refuse to accept it, or try and backpedal or try and hide my mistake or something like that. And that's something that only comes with time and maturity, and I guess realizing that, well, if you're wrong, it's okay, and everyone's wrong. And if you've been doing something for 20 years, you can still be wrong. You're just going to be wrong in different ways. So, I think that was the biggest thing, is just being okay with being wrong. And I guess, using it as an opportunity and just trying to get better rather than trying to hide and pretend, oh, no, I'm okay, I'm on top of everything, when sometimes you're not. And yeah, that took a while to learn that.
Yeah, no, that's an important point you make, and I think that's going to be great for people listening, especially like the younger listeners or people in early on in the career, that it's actually okay. And I know you referenced this earlier when we had a chat, like being wrong it's not bad. It's how you learn, but it's going to happen at some point. So if you can just embrace it, hold your hands up. Yeah, sometimes it's not the best feeling, but you generally are better off because you learn something. So I like how you kind of reframe that and have the positive mindset, which is really good.
Yeah.
Dan, for people who perhaps want to read your blogs, learn a little bit more about you, where's the best place to find your resources? Or I don't know if you're big on social media, or where can people find out more about what you do and you?
Okay, absolutely. So at the moment, what I'm doing is taking some of the research that I've done and tried to put together a resource to improve critical thinking skills in personal trainers. We wandered off topic a little bit there, but which is great. I really enjoyed the chat, but it's improving somebody's ability to be aware of their own knowledge, which we have mentioned, but then also the skills to correct it. So where to get the right information from, and how to assess that information, and what we can rely on and what we can't, or how much doubt we should have about something. Like, those are skills that you don't learn in a certificate 3 and 4 in fitness. And to be honest, something that they touch on in a degree, but you don't get a lot of it until higher levels of study, even, where you really start to get a grasp of what's really known and what's we think we know but we're not sure. So I'm trying to develop some of that in personal training. So there's a website I put together called criticalfitness.com.au, where people can find a couple of blog posts I've written there. And that's going to be growing over time. I'm going to add some bits and pieces from the thesis and comment on some sort of current fitness events as they occur. So people can go there. Or people can also, on Facebook, look for Critical Fitness EDU. And like that page, and they'll get updates about when articles are posted or when something happens in the news, and I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, no, great stuff, and I'll be sure to link those in the description below as well. So for people who are listening, you want to follow those and follow along with what you're doing, they certainly can. I think I'd be doing myself a disservice if I didn't ask this last question, purely because I get asked this question a lot, which is, where do you find this good knowledge? What are good resources, etc.? Now, based on your experience, where would you recommend people go, perhaps, to find reliable sources of information specific to our industry? And that might be, blog articles like what you produce yourself. It might be educators, tertiary educations in Australia. What are some of the recommendations that you'd give resource-wise?
Absolutely. I'll talk about nutrition first, because I think that's a really easy one, and ignoring sort of competition stuff for the meantime. For 95% of your clients, the Australian Dietary Guidelines and the Eat for Health website is the best website and the best resource you can come across. I think a lot of the people who are critical of that stuff for the general population maybe aren't as familiar with it as they could be. But there's so much good evidence that's talked about in that document, and it's a good read. It's big, but I've learned more reading that than I have about nutrition from any other source for the general public. So for trainers, that's where I'd be going for nutrition stuff. For exercise stuff, I'd get a good textbook. I really like Greg Haff's Encyclopedia of Strength and Conditioning. I think is a great one. Any like university level exercise physiology textbook is going to be fine as well. The online resources, I think they're just so variable. So I'm really avoiding commenting on any of those, because you don't know, like a PT may not have the skills to break down research well. So you can go to the original research, but are you interpreting it properly? Do you understand what the statistics mean? Do you understand what the methodology is? If you don't use it. Look for people who can interpret that for you. And a good, well-developed textbook is going to be a really good start. If somebody's simplifying that stuff and they've got that background, like an academic qualification, and can interpret that research, and there's an online source that works for you, go for it. But yeah, I don't have one that I recommend off the top of my head.
For sure. And that's understandable because, like you said, it is so varying these days with that many resources. I think people are overwhelmed, but I'm glad you mentioned those basics. Like, again, going back to the sources, the textbooks, etc. You can't really go wrong with that stuff because it's not been tainted. And again, it's all just like it's like a dictionary. It's like, this is the facts. You can argue with it, but it's not wrong because it's like the basic principle. So no, I think you're safe and right in those recommendations, and maybe even that in itself will give people an idea of, oh, I perhaps should be a little bit more cautious about all the glossy, websites, magazine, blogs, personal trainers. Take everything with a grain of salt. Sometimes there's some good information, but like you said, it's about learning how to assess, analyze, break that down, interpret it. And then perhaps, like you said as well, have that critical thinking and being able to go, okay, that's probably not quite right, but there is some truth in that, which takes time. So, Dan, thank you again for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you for sharing some of what you do, etc. Once again, for anyone who wants to follow along with what Dan's doing a little bit more, follow the links in the description below. And until next time, and as always, guys, stay fearless.